Well, it comes down to medical autonomy and medical liberty. It's not something that many Canadians have really doubted. I think it's quite clear in our case law, whether it's about the right to decline a blood transfusion, the right to assisted suicide in the Carter case, the right to, generally speaking, just take medication that you do or don't want, medical cannabis, obviously, all these issues where we've seen the courts come down on the side of medical autonomy.
Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, standing beside Victoria, BC's Jeremy Maddock, who's going to be self-representing himself while challenging BC's vaccine passport in this very courthouse behind us. You're not going to want to miss this update, but before we jump to it, if you appreciate that Rebel News has had their boots on the ground, we took the ferry to get here in Victoria to cover these stories for you, including our own challenge, or the Democracy Fund's challenge rather, but the challenge you, our supporters, helped make happen, which was a fight to the extreme exemption regime of the vaccine passports. You can help contribute to our journalism and help us recoup the costs to bring you these reports that, by the way, I don't see any legacy media reporters here today. By going to rebelfieldreports.com. Everything you chip in there, again, goes to our costs, our gas, our ferry, our hotel stays, and we appreciate your support. We're just coming out of the lunch break of the other course, the Democracy Fund's challenge to the vaccine passports and lack thereof of exemptions. And here you are, you're coming in from that. Tell us a little bit about your case that's coming up on the 13th. You guys may be seeing this after, not sure. It's a bit of a broader challenge. Explain that for a bit.
So basically, I'm challenging the vaccine passport order for restaurants, but I'm not challenging it. I don't assert a medical exemption. I'm saying that it should be a matter of personal choice, regardless of one's medical status. These vaccinations carry some benefits and some risks, and that's something that each person has to weigh for themselves.
So there has been 2 challenges to date in a similar nature, and Justice Hinkson, Chief Justice Hinkson, still hasn't ruled on those. He's kind of looking at them all together. But there's been a heavy team of lawyers that have been challenging. Why did you choose to be self-represented this time around?
Well, I work in the legal field myself. I do legal research consulting, and I work as a traffic court agent. So I'm comfortable with the court process. I understand how it works. Early on in this process, when I first heard about healthcare workers being fired, and a number of people reached out to me looking for legal help, and I contacted a lot of lawyers that I knew and tried to get lawyers involved, but sadly most lawyers were very reluctant to get involved. I think there's a certain amount of politics to that. Even those who agreed with me in principle were a little bit hesitant, and I think that there's a reputational cost for lawyers to get involved. There's also a huge amount of work to make something like this happen, and for a sole practitioner or for most of the lawyers that I'm in contact with, it's simply too much. So I felt that I would take my legal skills that I have and apply them to this cause, and hopefully make some positive change for liberty in our country.
Sorry to interrupt this interview. It's just during the editing portion of bringing this report up to you, Rebel News became aware of something else about Mr. Jeremy Maddock that I definitely would have asked him about at this point in the interview, just to make sure the public is up to speed. And that is, if you take a look at the Law Society here, back in January 21st, 2020, the Supreme Court of British Columbia issued an order prohibiting Jeremy Maddock of Victoria, BC, from engaging in the unauthorized practice of law and from commencing, prosecuting, or defending a proceeding in any court on behalf of someone else. The Law Society was awarded its costs. So naturally, since this is such an important challenge of a big nature for British Columbians, I reached out to Mr. Maddock, and this was some of his response. He says the Law Society injunction was imposed in response to his business model of appearing as agent for disputants in traffic court, which he began doing in 2014 and continued doing without incident until 2020. He says he graduated from UVic Law in 2016, but is not a practicing lawyer and was working instead as a consultant for lawyers. There were never any complaints, according to Mr. Maddock, about the quality of his services in traffic court, only the fact that he says that they were being delivered in the first place at a much lower cost than that of a lawyer's. Maddock continued that the injunction issue is still technically in place and that the matter is currently set for hearing before the BC Court of Appeal on December 5th, 2022, and that he remains hopeful that it may be resolved without further litigation. Now, you can find more on that statement as well as an update from Mr. Maddock about how he feels court actually went and took place. He says it was encouraging. So if you want that update after you're finished watching this interview with Mr. Maddock, you can open up the description box below and click on the link there, and that will take you to my full written report at rebelnews.com.
Now, again, we just walked out of on a lunch break on this court, the Democracy Fund's fight against the vaccine passport. What were some takeaways you took from that?
Well, I think it was interesting to see Justice Hinkson's almost disbelief that that a doctor wouldn't want to permit a medical exemption or to help somebody in these circumstances. But the sad thing, as I said with lawyers, a lot of doctors are really concerned that their own reputations will suffer or that their professional standing will suffer, and it's sad that doctors aren't able to be objective about this, but I think it's largely it's a profession that seems to be closing ranks, and Justice Hinkson maybe doesn't fully understand that yet, but I hope that he comes to realize that if there's no doctors willing to give evidence, it's not because there's no evidence to be given. It's that I've heard it said if 100% of experts disagree, that's easy to get to if you get rid of all the experts who disagree, right? So that seems to be what's happening.
Yeah, that was, in my mind, a bit ironic. You can find the full report to what took place in the courthouse here, May 10th and 11th, in the written article below. But in the first case, which was brought on by the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Justice Hinkson said, "Where's the doctor? You keep telling me the plaintiffs are saying their doctors were too scared or too afraid to write an exemption for their patients." So he was saying, where's the affidavit of a doctor saying this? In this case that we just came out, the Democracy Fund's case, they had an affidavit from a doctor saying that I was intimidated from writing an exemption for plaintiff Lee Eliason, who is an immunocompromised mom with rare illnesses. And then Justice Hinkson is saying, well, what kind of doctor is afraid to do this? So what message do you have for Canadians? Why is this case that you're taking on important?
Well, it comes down to medical autonomy and medical liberty. It's not something that many Canadians have really doubted. I think it's quite clear in our case law, whether it's about the right to decline a blood transfusion, the right to assisted suicide in the Carter case, the right to, generally speaking, just take medication that you do or don't want, medical cannabis, obviously, all these issues where we've seen the courts come down on the side of medical autonomy. There's risks, there's benefits to every medical procedure and every medical treatment, and Canadians have to be able to decide that for themselves.
Well, I think that is certainly a very good question. Now, again, if you want to find out what's happened in the first and second challenge to BC's vaccine passports, and stay tuned for what's going to happen in this case and another case that's being brought on by the Canadian Society for the Advancement of Science in Public Policy, you're going to want to click on the link in the description. We'll take you to the full report on Rebel News. But there is something that you had in common with the following case that's to come up, and that is you weren't really being recognized in your case. Do you want to touch on that?
The government initially argued that I didn't have standing to bring the case because they said that I should have applied for a vaccine card or I should have applied for a medical exemption. Now, because I haven't received a vaccine, I don't qualify for a vaccine card, and I don't have any of these conditions that are being mentioned on these forms where I would be recognized as having an exemption. So my view is that my decision is a personal decision, and the government initially felt that didn't qualify to give me standing. What changed was when the Canadian Association for Science in Public Policy, they faced a similar challenge, and they were found to have standing.
Challenge here in BC because healthcare is under a provincial mandate, And as a result, if there's any successes for any legal challenges in other jurisdictions like Ontario, it doesn't have any bearing necessarily here in BC. So we need to initiate a legal challenge here in BC Supreme Court.
And I was pleased when last night I received an email from opposing counsel saying that they no longer dispute that I have standing to make this argument.
Absolutely. And we've received a statement from that other organization who'll be challenging the government for medical freedom. Our petition challenges 3 sets of Dr. Henry's public health orders that mandated injections for healthcare workers. Our basis was that the orders were unreasonable and unconstitutional. You can find more about that and your story, find out where to find them in the written report below. I'm Drea Humphrey for Rebel News. This is Mr. Maddock. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thank you very much, Drea.
It wasn't just myself and my BC producer, Matt Brevner, behind the camera who came all the way out here. It was also an amazing legal team from JSS Barristers as well who fought this case thanks to your continued donations at fightvaccinepassports.com. This is just one of many cases we've helped the Democracy Fund take on to fight for medical freedom in Canada, and we ask that you continue to support those cases. They are very costly, but very important. So please go to fightvaccinepassports.com.